that have benefited lots of our families in terms of the way we talk to children about important topics, and that's been that's due to their hard work. I also want to thank Adina Burian, who I understand is might still be at a hockey game, which we're always multitasking, and that's part of life. But Adina is here, and Adina is very involved in Yad Vashem, and Adina brought this program to us and this opportunity to us. We always talk about how to there's no shortage, and there certainly hasn't been a shortage over the last couple of years of challenging things to be talking to kids about, or choosing not to talk to kids about, unless they are. We generally, I think, choose to talk to kids, but how to talk to kids is a real malacha, is a real work of art sometimes, in terms of how to find age appropriate ways to talk to kids about hard things. So it's not about, I think sometimes we choose not to talk because we don't know what to say, and our goal tonight is to figure out how to talk in a way that would be healthy, productive, real, and not anxiety producing, but just building kids and building their resilience. So we are very grateful for that opportunity. And Shani, it's all yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Rabbi Krauss. On behalf of the Guidance Department, I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight. Thank you so much for joining. We're really delighted to partner this evening with Yad Vashem to bring you this very informative and important program. Before we begin, I just want to note that there will be an opportunity at the end of the presentation for you to ask questions, but please also feel free as things come up. If you have a question, to put it into the chat, and our presenters will hopefully get to those questions at the end. And I'd now like to get started and introduce Dr. Marlene Yahalom, who is the Director of Education at the American Society for Yad Vashem.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. As you heard, my name is Marlene Yahalom, and I'm honored to be the Director of Education for the American Society for Yad Vashem. We work in partnership with Yad Vashem Israel in areas of education, commemoration, documentation, and remembrance. We're located in New York City, and it's good to be speaking to colleagues and friends at SAR again. We had a program with you on Kristallnacht this year, and we look forward to having more in the future. But to get to our topic this evening, on behalf of our co-chairs, Adina Burian and Mark Moskowitz, our Board of Trustees, and our Executive Director, Stanley Stone, I'd like to welcome Lori Gerson. We're proud to bring you this program this evening. Lori is a graduate of Barnard in New York City. She worked for many years in the field of education in the United States. In 2005, Lori moved to Israel with her family and then joined the Yad Vashem team as a guide for education groups. Since 2016, Lori has taken on the role of educational coordinator in Yad Vashem's Overseas Education and Training Department, where she lectures, coordinates seminars, develops curricula, and guides educators in best practices. She works in the International School for Holocaust Studies at Yad Vashem in the Teacher Training Department. Please join me in welcoming my friend and colleague, Lori Gerson. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene, and thank for that introduction. And it's really an honor to be here. And thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. And I just want to somewhat comment on what Rabbi Krauss said when he talked about how there are no shortage, unfortunately, of difficult topics to talk to our children about. I want to just give you a little bit of history on how this session developed for parents. We've been giving it to teachers, and we had talked about possibly doing it for parents, but then all of a sudden, I have to say that an international Holocaust this past year in January, I was one of the lucky ones in my department. I somehow found myself not doing anything for that day. And I don't know, I can say that International Holocaust Day, or Yom Hashoah Day, for us at Yad Vashem and my department is, I mean, I hate to say this, it's kind of like Macy's during Christmas. I mean, this is like our really busy time. And I can say that with this crowd. And 3 days before, we get this emergency phone call via the Israeli embassy in London, that they had gotten a phone call from the American school in London, that the parents there we're really struggling with the rise in anti-Semitism that's going on in Europe and going on near their homes. And they wanted a way to talk to their children about it. And so within 3 days, we got this session together. But the truth is, you'll see, I understand maybe there's some teachers joining as well today, that it's really not at all a far leap to take a session that we give to teachers to give it to parents, because really as parents, we are the front line for educating our children. So it's really more or less the same session, but it's a little bit different. And when I thought about doing it for parents instead of teachers, so it made me just pause for a minute and think about the role of a parent in comparison to the role of a teacher. And many times I do this now when I'm with parents in a live session, and I ask them, I say, if one had to put into one sentence, right, one word, if I were to ask you, what is, when it comes all down to it, what is our job as parents? What is ultimately our job as parents? And I know it involves a lot, especially as religious Jews, it also involves a lot, but when we think about it, I mean, I'm saying this in kind of a, almost like a funny kind of way, but our job is to really one day be able to have children that we can stand at our door and say goodbye to. Now, of course, we never really do that with our children, right? We never really say goodbye, but the idea is that we've done our job when we have made our children into adults. That's our job. Now, there's a lot that goes into that, but we do that because we won't always be here. And that's what we have to do for them. And the icing on the cake is, if not just if they're productive members of society, but if they're contributing members of society, if they're people on top of that we can be proud of. And of course, as religious Jews, that always ties in too. But really our job is just to make sure, right, that they can sustain themselves in the world that we have today. So of course, when I thought about that, I couldn't help but remember what I had learned in my upbringing in a Jewish day school. And that was that the rabbis themselves had given thought to what parents are obligated, or a father, so to speak, is obligated to provide for his son, right? They talk about, in the Gemara, it talks about that. And of course, it says with a son, a father has to give a bris, a pidyon haben, if it's the firstborn. But then it goes on. And so it says, and I want to share those with you because they are relevant today to our discussion, some of the things that the rabbis back then were thinking about. And the first thing they say is Torah. So of course, we're going to say, well, the rabbis, of course, they're going to say Torah. But if we think about it, in the Torah, of course, it's full of mitzvot that we have to do. And a lot of mitzvot tell us how to behave properly and how our society should behave, but also even our history, what the Avot did, we're supposed to learn from their behavior. The history that we study with our nation, we're also supposed to learn how we behaved. And so very much so, we can say that the Torah is really there to teach values. Okay, so we have that. Then the rabbis go on, they say that a father is supposed to help his son get married. He's supposed to also make sure that he teaches him an occupation. And then we know that they add, and some people add, the last one a lot of people find surprising. I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but they add a father's obligated to teach his son how to swim. So I know we have a rabbi in the crowd, so maybe he wants to comment on that, but I know a lot of people say really it's just, to teach him. Obviously in those days that would save his life, a child, if they were able to swim. A lot of people interpret that you have to teach your children, that you have to make sure that they're safe. So for example, maybe one would say that you have to make sure that they wear helmets when they ride their bikes. I have heard certain rabbis from certain yeshivot in Israel, for example, that means you have to teach your children how to defend themselves, whether it's how to Krav Maga or how to carry a gun if they need to. So I'm going to take a little poetic license here and say that I think nowadays maybe the rabbis were ahead of their time, and I think all of us out here understand that even as of 10 years ago, we understand a lot more about mental health and how important that is, not just physical health, but the mental health of our children. And that maybe we could say that one way we could think of it is that not only do we have to make sure that our children are physically safe, but that their mental health is safe. And we have to have children that grow to be adults that that don't drown in their sorrow, or that don't get paralyzed from fear when they live in a world that we live in. And I have to say, just a few weeks ago, I was reading an article that was talking about a study that was done on university campuses and the rise in anxiety of students in at the university level. And one of the reasons given, and maybe, I don't know if I'm speaking to parents in what grade they're in, and maybe your children will be the only children that will never ever have a smartphone, but that nowadays, especially with the access to information, bad information is relayed over and over and over again, and it's really affecting our children. So we maybe have even a bigger challenge than we had even just 5 or 10 years ago in terms of really helping our children deal with difficult issues. So if we look at the list that we have from the rabbis, we started with values, right? And then we end with the swimming, actually teaching the Shoah, the methods that we use, we can actually help you with that, even though it may sound counterintuitive, because I know when we think about the period of the Holocaust, it is a time when all values and ethics seem to be out the window and the whole world was topsy-turvy. But believe it or not, and maybe even because of that, it is a topic that we can actually really use to teach values. And also, even though it sounds counterintuitive, and we certainly do not want to, we certainly don't want we don't want to traumatize our children, but actually by, I think, teaching them properly, I like to say we can practice their resilience muscle. In other words, the more that they're able to handle difficult topics when they're younger, you're setting the stage for them to be able to handle even more difficult topics when they're older and at a much more complicated level. Okay, so that was my little introduction for our topic today. So with that, I'm going to start sharing my presentation here. So I'm going to share my screen. So you bear with me. Okay, so here we have, and like I said, we're going to go over some of the methodology that we give over to teachers. And I'll only give you things that really apply to parents, but you'll see how very much we can extend that to our own children in our homes. Okay, so how to talk to children about trauma without traumatizing. We're going to use the Shoah as the traumatic topic that we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so Yad Vashem is a very specific educational philosophy, and there's actually 4 main principles. I'll only bring 2 of them here today. And one is that first and foremost, we teach the human story. And when we teach the human story, we mean the story of the Jewish victim. Now, I specify the Jewish victim because when we think about all the different people that have roles in the Holocaust, there's the perpetrators, there's the rescuers, there's the bystanders. And there was a tendency, if we look at Holocaust historiography, there was a tendency right after the Shoah itself to focus on the perpetrators, right? Like, how was this humanly possible? How could this have happened? Now, it's very important to study that. There are historical trends need to be studied. Obviously, because first and foremost, we want to prevent things we want to prevent a Holocaust from ever happening again. But especially in the classroom when we're teaching our students, very much over the years, an understanding has we've internalized an understanding that what can our students learn from the fact that 1 million Jews were gassed in Auschwitz, other than man's capacity to do evil. But where they really can learn lessons, if we really want to teach our children values while we're teaching them history, and by the way, I like to say as educators and not historians, right, our job is to take that history and infuse it with meaning. Okay, so if we want to give meaning to the history itself, then we're less concerned with how the Jews died, and we're more concerned with how they lived with what was happening to them. Okay, so you're going to see that through the talk. But when I talk about teaching the history through the human story, first and foremost, the Jewish victim, and especially when the children are younger, that's going to definitely be our focus. As they get older, we get into the more complicated topics of the perpetrators, bystanders, you know, and the gray areas between lots of those roles sometimes. Okay, the other rule we have, and for parents is very, very important, remember this phrase, all of the teachers that come to our seminars at Yad Vashem, remember, safely in and safely out. Okay, and I'm going to explain what that means. We're going to bring them safely into the topic of the Shoah, especially at a younger age, and we're going to take them out safely. And I will show you how we do that. Okay. Now, the other thing that I do want to show you is this chart here. And maybe to some of you, it seems intuitive. Okay, but I just want to show you that when they're younger, we have less knowledge and also less complexity. And as they get older, we increase the knowledge we give them, and we also increase the complexity of what we're teaching them. So, for example, knowledge when they're younger, you can talk about things like the badge the Jews had to wear, and you can talk about, let's say, you can even talk about a ghetto. Okay, but the complexity of what you're talking about will increase as they get older. The kinds of knowledge that you will not teach at all when they're young is you're not going to talk about gas chambers at all. In other words, there are certain topics that won't be discussed at all in terms of knowledge until they get older. There are certain topics you can discuss, but the complexity will only increase as they get older. So I hope I was clear about that. If anybody has any questions, we can discuss later. And keep in mind also, especially when we talk about the Holocaust, and you're gonna see stories that we share with younger children, loss, unfortunately, is age appropriate. Young children need to learn about loss. Mass murder is not. Okay, so I hope everybody understands the distinction there. Okay, so talking about loss, unfortunately, young children need to learn about loss. Okay, but mass murder, that's what we put on hold until they're older. And the idea is that if they learn about loss when they're younger, then when they're older, they're more able to handle the mass murder. Okay, so now we're going to go on. I'm going to give you an example and show you how we do this. So in Israel, and I'm not saying I recommend this here unless it's okay for your community and your school and what you do in Israel. In Yom HaShoah, we have a siren. We don't have a choice. They start teaching the Shoah in Gan, nursery school. Okay, but we have a really, really beautiful method for doing that we give over to teachers all throughout Israel. It's a primary source, which is also fantastic. And you see it here. And I'm going to try and show you. I have here, there's a set that comes, and it's called Tommy. You can see it here. It comes, and it's a book, and it comes with cards. And what it is there was a 3-year-old boy in the Theresienstadt ghetto. Here, I'll show you. It comes in like a book form too. Oh, here you can see. Okay, now he was in the Theresienstadt ghetto, Tommy, and his parents were artists. There were a lot of artists in the Theresienstadt ghetto, and his parents were part of an underground artist colony, and they were drawing what was really taking place, and they were actually able to get some of those drawings out, and they were discovered. And Tommy's parents were taken away, and they were killed because of this. There was an act of resistance that they were involved in, and they were taken away, and they were killed with almost all of the artists in their underground colony. There was one couple that friends of theirs that were not taken away, and they adopted Tommy when the Shoah was over. Okay, but when Tommy was about to be 3, one of the things that his father drew aside from these underground photos was he made him a book for his birthday. Okay, so we have that book because when Tommy turned 18, his adopted parents gave it to him, and eventually he gave it over to Yad Vashem. And apparently his father, you can see Bedrich Frita, what was his name? He wasn't only an artist, but he was an educator. And this picture you see here, it is the second page of the book. The first book is his dedication. He's saying happy birthday. And this is the only picture in the book that actually shows the ghetto itself, or that shows the Holocaust. I've brought you a few scenes from the other pictures, and you can see here we have a ghetto scene, so to speak. Right here's little Tommy. He's turning 3. He's looking out a window. He is behind a wall, so he can't really leave. Notice that he's standing on a suitcase. So clearly he's either in transit, or he's been taken out of his home, or he's ready to go somewhere. He'd like to go somewhere. We know traditionally, and I wouldn't share this with younger children, but believe it or not, we do Tommy in high school. But you can see here, these are traditional signs: the raven and the bare tree. Those are signs of an impending doom in art. So you can, this is a level that one can talk to even really, really young children. You can use to talk to young children with. Now, if you look in the book, what's nice about the book, and you see, is that you're starting to teach the Shoah from the human perspective. It's showing Tommy as a 3-year-old boy, and there's different layers of the pictures, and especially because they made it into cards, a parent or a teacher can use whichever scenes they want. So for example, I'm going to give you an example of what a first grader said. A first grader here, look at this. You see, this is it says mommy and daddy, and it's a strange picture because if you'll notice, on the one hand, they're crying and yet they're happy. They're smiling. And a first grader raised her hand and she understood enough to know. And she said, well, they're sad because they have to be in the ghetto, but they're happy because they have Tommy as their son. Now think of a first grader understanding that those deep human emotions. And she was 100% right. That's exactly what it was. They were sad because they had to be in the ghetto and they couldn't give Tommy everything that they wanted to. But at this point, they were still with their 3-year-old son and they were so happy to be with him. Now, the other pictures too, you see here, it's just a regular 3-year-old scribbling. In fact, he writes here, doesn't even write Tommy is scribbling. He writes Tommy is drawing, right? He sees the potential of a young child because like we said, he's an educator. And I also want to show you how you can show them the book and they can learn about a boy, Tommy, who was in the Holocaust. And then each year as you can use the book and increase the knowledge even just through this book. You'll see here that he draws a lot of images with pages with food. And obviously we know that food was a big problem in the ghetto. But in some of the scenes, you can just show that they like food. But then as they get a little bit older, you can see here we have empty pots, right? Question marks. What are we going to have? There's no food. There's not enough food. So you can use all the pictures, you can only use some of them. And as they get older, you can use the ones that maybe give a little hint of what ghetto life is like. Okay. And lastly, I want to show you this set of pictures. Excuse me, I have a cough, I'm battling. You can see her, he draws Tommy as an artist. He draws Tommy getting married one day. He draws Tommy going on a trip. He says, where in the world are you going to go? These are the hopes of a father for his child's future. Thank you. So we see again here, there are many things that can be taught to a child on their level. And one of them here is the hope the Jews always had, that they carried with them, right? Their faith, that they would make it through this tough time, or their belief in the future and things like that. Okay, so that's for younger children. Now, the truth is, we don't at Yad Vashem say that you need to start teaching the Shoah in kindergarten if you don't have to. There was a school that had mentioned to me, well, the first graders, they do a program with candles in Yom HaShoah and the first graders see it. Well, if they wanted to do something so the first graders could be aware, I would definitely recommend Tommy. And remember that when we do include our younger children, if we decide to do so, that when we do include them, we really are contributing to their Jewish identity and their belonging to our community as a whole. So it can be a positive experience for them. They're maybe seeing what's going on. Sometimes we compare it to an expecting mother with a toddler. They sense something is going on, but they're not included. And again, even though it sounds counterintuitive, they get anxiety is increased when they don't know what's going on or when their questions aren't answered. So if we have the tools to answer their questions properly or to include them properly if we want to, we have them for you. Now, we do think, though, if you decide to wait until a bit later, we do think 3rd or 4th grade is a good time to start introducing them to it's like math. You can't learn multiplication without learning addition. You have to understand the lower layers to understand the complexity. So we do think 3rd or 4th grade is a good time to start, and we have the tools to teach. So I want to show you how we continue when we move on. We talk about building up knowledge, but also building up complexity. So on the left side, you see here, I mean, can everybody see the letters are small, but these are 2 books that we have. One here, I just brought, you can see one is called I Wanted to Fly here. Well, I Wanted to Fly Like a Butterfly. We're working, by the way, as soon as I get back to Israel, one of my next jobs is to make this into an ebook. So it'll be available online and you can all have the link to that. And the other one is The Daughter We Had Always Wanted. We're also working on that to be an ebook. So it'll be available for everyone. But I just want to show you here what I mean by increasing the complexity. So here we're talking about the ghetto, descriptions of what the ghetto was like. And here's for 3rd and 4th grade. And you can see that it says here, The Germans ordered Jews to move into a certain neighborhood in each town. The Jewish neighborhood was called a ghetto. Grandmother and my aunts, as well as cousins Kenya, lived with the rest of the Jews in the ghetto in Bielorusska. It was forbidden for Jews to leave the ghetto and conduct business in the marketplace. Okay, that's what we have about the ghetto. If you look on the right side to grades 5 and 6, and you look at the third line down, all the Jews of the city were ordered to leave their homes and move into a ghetto. The ghetto was a small area at the edge of the city whose inhabitants had been evacuated. All the city's Jews were forced to live there. Barbed wire surrounded the ghetto, and the guards at the gate only allowed Jews with permits to leave. The ghetto was too small for all the Jewish inhabitants, and so several families were forced to crowd together in one apartment. Okay, so you already see the difference. In one, we just say all the Jews had to live there together. Okay, and it was forbidden for them to leave. The other one, we have barbed wire, we have the crowding, we have that there were guards there at the gates. So I hope you're beginning to understand how it's similar knowledge, but we're increasing the complexity, and we're also increasing the information that they get. And at the same time, you see that we're also, I mean, I hate to say this, but we're building their Holocaust vocabulary, which is something that it's chaval we have to teach, but we do. Okay, so that to also explain what goes into this, we're following, you can see here, what we call our spiral model to our Holocaust education. When we think about children at the really youngest of ages, what do they know? They just know me, right? The individual. And by the way, Tommy reflects that. Tommy is about the individual boy, and they very much can relate to that. And then as they grow older, right, they begin to understand family and the people around them, then they understand their community, and eventually they're old enough to understand historical context. And that's more like 6th and 7th grade. Okay, and that's based on a lot of educational philosophers, and a lot of people ascribe to that. So by the time they get to 6th or 7th grade, we can already start teaching topics about the Holocaust. But now I'm going to go back to how do we teach, here we go. How do we teach Holocaust in elementary school? And we have some few rules that I think will be helpful to parents if they want to sit down and discuss the Holocaust or other difficult topics with their children, okay? So the first thing that we do, remember I said safely in. Okay, so safely in with the Holocaust is we're definitely with younger children, it's always a story about a survivor. Okay, so their first encounter with the Holocaust should not be Anne Frank. And first of all, it's too complex, Anne Frank, for younger students. But I know that there's a book. I was actually just at a book sale today. There's, excuse me, a book. You know, they have those Who Was Christopher Columbus, right? They have all those books. I think the first book that your children pick up about the Holocaust should not be Who Was Anne Frank. She didn't survive. Right? We have plenty of stories out there about survivors. We're talking about safely in, safely out. They're going to be learning about something very difficult. They're going to be learning about people that were killing Jews. First of all, it's important for them to know that Jews survived. Okay, so you want to start with this. I think in the first, what we call a first encounter with the Holocaust, especially with younger children. I'm going to take a drink here. You want it to be a survivor's story. Mm-hmm. And that creates a feeling of security even before they go into the story. They know this person survived. It's almost like if you watch a scary movie, you know, and you know it's a truth, and you know the ending, and you know it's going to be bad, but you know they survive. You have a little more ability, even as an adult, to watch that movie. Now, we also use what we call emotional anchors, and especially in our books, which are very purposely written to follow our educational philosophy. So let me give you an example of what an emotional anchor is, what we call an emotional anchor. We're going back to that page that we saw, and she's talking about here, Hannah, she says, it was forbidden for Jews to leave. And she says, however, because my mother was a seamstress, she was allowed to continue working. So she just talked about the ghetto. And she talked about how the Jews had to be in the ghetto and they couldn't leave. And look at the bottom, what she says, when a customer came in to try on a dress that my mother had sewn, I sat on a small chair in the corner of the room watching, and it was fun to watch the women come in and try on the clothes. Okay, so we just had a very difficult topic about the ghetto, a difficult little chapter about that, or a little excerpt. And she ends with saying, I was still with my mom and I went with her to work, and I used to have fun watching the women try on the clothes. Okay, so what we've done right there is we've added in what we call an emotional anchor, and it's part of the story. It's not that we had to purposely add it, but we purposely put it in the book so that when children read something difficult, there's something safe they can cling to, so to speak. I'll give you another example. In the other bookmarks that we have for 5th and 6th grade, you can see here, it says, this is really interesting. Her father is already taken away. And her father, they assume, is already killed. Okay. And she's living in the ghetto, and she's with her grandparents, and her aunt is with them, and her mother. And they're talking about possibly sending the aunt away for labor. I mean, she might have to leave it. It could be a difficult chapter because it's talking about how difficult it was for the Jews, and they may have to send the aunt away. And it says here, well, mother said, and she said, in the evening when mother came home from work, she called grandfather to the stairwell. Several minutes later, everyone came in, and we all sat down to eat our slice of bread and the soup that grandmother had prepared. Now think about that. On the one hand, they're only eating a slice of bread and soup for dinner, but what are they still doing? They are still sitting down to dinner as a family. And this is what we call this an emotional anchor. And we're also going to call it something else in a minute. You're going to see what else it is. Okay. So I'm going to refer back to that. Okay. But those are the emotional anchors we talk about. Now, usually when we teach younger children, we always want to teach it in a story format. Why? Because a story is a safe format for children. You've been telling them stories since they, you could set them on your laps. They're safe environments for them. When their parents tell them a story, when their teachers tell them a story, it just is a safe environment. It's going safely in. So if you have an opportunity to use a story, use a story. And what we say here is you see the primary fundamental concepts given through the narrative of the story. When you tell the story, what's in the story is what you include when you talk to your children. So for example, if there's a ghetto, they learn what a ghetto is. If there's the badge, they learn about the badge. Okay, you don't have to go on and on about every topic in the Holocaust. The narrative will tell you what you should be giving over to your children, and it keeps the lesson contained, and it gives them information that they can grapple with at that time. And next time they'll learn more. Okay, so the story should guide you. If it's in the story, then you can then explain it, and that will also keep the knowledge organized in their minds. Okay, now the next principle we have is that it's very important. In this case, it's the parent, obviously, but in a school, the primary teacher, the teacher that really knows the students, should be giving the lesson on the Holocaust. And obviously, it's because if there's any child that has experienced trauma in the class, then the teacher is going to have to deal with that. I'll give you an example. One of my colleagues was once giving a workshop to teachers, and we have a book about dolls, and one of for younger students. And one of the stories, the emphasis with the doll is really on the mother, and the mother was Harak, and the mother did this, and the mother did that, and the blah, blah, blah. Okay. And one teacher came up and said, well, I have a problem. Not only did a student of mine in my class had a mother that just passed away, and this is in Israel. She said, I have another daughter whose mother was just arrested, and she's in jail. So what my colleague said to her, and if you think about it, is brilliant. She said, okay, so then when you read this story, you're going to read about the mother, but you're going to focus on the doll. You're going to focus on her attachment to the doll. You're going to focus on the doll was what she clung to. The doll was her coping mechanism. You're going to have to change the focus. So it's very important. I mean, as parents, we know nobody knows our children like we do. So we have the ability to do that. But with teachers, we remind them it's very important that the teacher that knows the students the best are the ones that give over talks that are about the Holocaust or anything traumatic. The other reason why is also we assume that with a topic like the Holocaust or anything like that, that the child will go home, and not only will they do the processing that the teacher provides for them in class, they're going to go home and think about it, and they might have questions the next day. I mean, we would welcome questions the next day, but if the teacher wasn't there, if it wasn't the main teacher giving them the lesson, then they won't understand. Okay, so that's why it's important. The next principle we have is just what I already did with you, moving on in complexity from individual to family to community as they get older. Okay, and then we have this idea of creating empathy, and I understand that in some circles this is a buzzword here. When we talk about empathy, what are we talking about? We want to teach our children to be empathetic, right? And I think we can generally translate it as to be people that can see when other people are feeling pain. Okay, but also in order to do that, somebody has to be able to understand somebody else. They have to be able to relate to them, so to speak. So one of the ways that we create this connection with the Holocaust is not just by teaching the human story, because teaching the human story is what does that, but specifically with younger children, we do what I have here called age matching, meaning we're teaching the lessons that we have for, let's say, 3rd and 4th grade and 5th and 6th grade. They're a story about a child who was that age during the Holocaust. Right, because they're not going to relate as, I mean, you could write a story about a doctor in the Holocaust in, let's say, the Warsaw Ghetto, and you can write it at their level, but they won't relate to it as much as they will as to a child that was in the Warsaw Ghetto. Okay, so that, I think that's obvious, and also it allows, we really, all throughout the ages, we want to avoid judgment when talking about, especially the Jewish victims in the Shoah. Okay, so creating empathy helps us do that. Now, there was other thing that I told you that I would refer back to, and that's what we call these moments of light in the darkness. Okay, and this is also for all ages. Where do the real lessons come from? They come from, like we say, learning how the Jews lived and struggled and coped with what was happening to them during the Holocaust, not just how they died. So you see here lessons of mental fortitude, resilience, mutual help, creativity, and maybe the Holocaust can be such a useful tool in teaching these things, because maybe because it was so dark, the moments where these things happen, these moments of what we call like little nuggets of inspiration, they, so to speak, shine so bright because everything was so extreme. So the eating the meal that we talked about, even after the father was gone and the aunt was about to leave as well, eating a meal with the family is also, it's a moment that's light in the darkness, right? It's showing family cohesiveness and being together, and that's a safe place, even though in general they're in a dangerous place, or trying to create as much of a safe place as they can. And I just want to add here that one of the things that we really try to, when our educators come to seminars at Yad Vashem, one of the things that they learn about is something that we call a choiceless choice. It was coined by Lawrence Langer. He was a Holocaust educator, and I'm sure, even if you've never heard that phrase before, we understand what that means. What's a choiceless choice? It's a choice that nobody should ever have to make. And just al regel achat, I mean, a good example is, let's say, a mother was in the Warsaw Ghetto and her husband was already killed. She has 3 young children and they have no food, right? And her oldest is 10. Is she going to say, I mean, that's the age of the children that were the smugglers in the Warsaw Ghetto. But what happened to smugglers if they were caught, whether they were 8, 10, or 20? They were shot in the spot. So that's what we call a choiceless choice. They will all die, or because they have no food, or she sends her 10-year-old to go and smuggle where he could possibly be killed. And that's just an example of a choiceless choice. But it's through these choiceless choices and the choices that Jews made that really the lessons can be learned, and certainly where values can be taught. Okay, so I'm just throwing that out there, and we'll see that as we go on a little bit. And also just keep in mind that younger children, first of all, the younger they are, they're more likely they are to listen to their parents or their teachers than their peers. So if we have them at that age, it is a good opportunity to give over the values that we want to give to them. And certainly we can use stories, believe it or not, we can use difficult stories to do that. Okay, and lastly, that any lesson, and I think we'll talk about this also in the home, that mental processing and creativity, that processing what they learned and having room to express is essential. If they come home and they say, Mom, they were doing a thing on the Holocaust, it's not a time to say, oh, I'm busy, I'll get back to you. I mean, I know, believe me, I'm guilty too. We lead very busy lives, but when you're talking about any difficult topic, it's a time to sit down, make sure sometimes safely in with a difficult topic is literally just sitting with your child and giving them the time they need and allowing them to process afterwards. Okay, we'll talk about that. Now, what I want to do is I want to take a little bit of time to actually show you one of the tools that we use. I already showed you some books and some teaching tools. I want to show you it's a video. It's not exactly new, but the English dubbing for it is brand new. So you'll notice that they had done it and they had put English subtitles there. So when I came into the department and this became my mission, I said, third graders can't really read subtitles as they're watching a movie, and we certainly don't want them to be, because it'll be a little distracting. So I was able to, after a long time, I was able to finally get them to dub it. So it's really brand new, and it's available on YouTube. I mean, anybody can use it, but I want to show you. But the first thing we do, and if we bring it into a classroom, is we introduce the students to Simcha Holtzberg. Okay, and you're going to hear about Simcha Holtzberg. Simcha Holtzberg came to be known as the father of the wounded soldiers. Okay, you're going to see why. You can see the smile on his face. First of all, they see he's an old man. And that's important because they're learning about somebody who lived to be an old man. Okay, so we introduce him to Simcha Holtzberg. And then we're going to watch a video that Yad Vashem created about his story. So we have books, but now we have a video. And we know certainly in the classroom, or certainly even in our own family, we have different children, different students that learn differently. So it's good to have as many ways of teaching as we can. Now, before we watch the video, I want you to look for certain things. So I have a list of questions that we're going to look for when we watch the video. We're going to tear the video apart so you really understand the educational philosophy and what we've talked about today. And I'll give you a chance to preview the video. First of all, we're going to see who are the main characters in the video, where the dialogue takes place and why. We're going to see what we already know about Simcha before we see what happens to him during the Holocaust and why this is important. We're going to see some historical photographs. We're going to and see what kind are shown and why is it important to use photographs. Okay, we do use them. Then you'll see we switch to animation. We're going to say, why do we switch to animation? We're going to look for, I want everybody, I explain what emotional anchors are, see if you can find them in the video, and also the moments of light and darkness. And then we're going to talk about what important values can be expressed and discussed after viewing the video. Okay, so we're going to take a few minutes and watch the video, and then we'll go back. Okay, so we'll start that right now. Hopefully.
Noam, lunch will be ready soon.
Okay, Grandpa.
Noam?
Grandpa, who's that?
That's me. Don't you recognize me? And next to me is my best friend, Simcha, just like his name says. He was a very happy person who knew how to make other people happy. And he was a great symbol of giving. He was very famous.
He was famous?
Yes.
So how did you know him?
In Poland, when we were children, in Warsaw. Here, take a look and see. This is Warsaw before the war. Warsaw was a big city. Many Jews lived there, and there were many Jewish schools, synagogues, and a very rich cultural life. And the kids, we had a great time. Simcha, my friend, was one of the mischievous boys. He loved to play soccer and eat chocolate. He also liked to help other people and make them happy. However, one day, everything changed. The war broke out.
What war?
World War II.
Huh? A war all around the world?
Yes, a war that included many countries. The war began when Germany invaded Poland, after which they conquered much of Europe. You know, Noam, the Germans especially wanted to hurt the Jews.
And this is what we call the Holocaust?
Yes,
And what happened to Simcha?
Simcha and his family's life changed completely. The Germans persecuted the Jews everywhere, and it was very dangerous to even leave the house.
Simcha, tomorrow you won't be going to school.
Why?
Because the Germans have closed all the schools. In the meantime, it's better we leave the house as little as possible. It's safer inside.
Daddy, what is that?
A wall. They're surrounding us with a wall.
Why did they build a wall?
Because the Germans didn't want the Jews to leave the ghetto.
What's a ghetto?
A ghetto is an area inside a city which the Germans sealed and forced the Jews to move into. Only the Jews with work permits got special permission to leave the ghetto. The German soldiers guarded the entrances from the outside of the ghetto. Inside the ghetto, it was very crowded. In the winter, there was not enough food, so hunger became a very big problem. Simcha had no choice. He exchanged what little his family had for some food. He gave his neighbor his coat for half a loaf of bread, and he exchanged medicine for some potatoes. Soon, even that was gone, and there was no food left at all in the ghetto. One night, Simcha woke up and heard whispering sounds.
We have no food left, Shmuel. What should we do?
I'll sneak through the wall and get us something to eat.
What are you talking about? That's so dangerous. You could get caught.
There's no choice. If we don't eat, we'll die.
Simcha heard their conversation and decided he had to do something. The night became day, and Simcha still had not returned.
Where was Simcha?
He escaped the ghetto. There were some children who were able to smuggle dry bread and potatoes into the ghetto. Simcha couldn't find any food. He didn't want to come back home empty-handed, so he searched and searched all night. You won't believe what he came back with.
Come on, Grandpa, tell me already.
Chocolate.
Chocolate?
Chocolate. And even though he only found one bar, his mother found a way to divide the bar up for everyone. She melted the chocolate in hot water. The sweet steam of the chocolate spread through the whole house and slowly reached the other children. Noam, you won't believe what happened in those few moments. It was an unforgettable moment.
Wow, Grandpa, what a story. And what happened to Simcha after that?
Simcha and his family had to cope with many hardships during the war. However, Simcha survived.
And what happened to his parents?
They didn't survive. They were murdered in the Holocaust. But Simcha stayed alive, and at the end of the war, he made Aliyah.
Does he have kids?
Yes, he got married and had 2 sons. During his entire life, he continued to show courage and that same ability to give and help others, which so characterized him during the war. He used to go from hospital to hospital and visit wounded soldiers, trying to encourage them. When he was asked why he was doing that, he replied, "I want to bring joy to as many hearts as I can and be worthy of the name that my parents gave me." He treated the soldiers as if they were his children, and many of them called him Father. After a while, he got the name of the Father of Wounded Soldiers.
Wow. You have a very special friend, Grandpa.
And can you imagine what he always had in his pocket?
Chocolate.
Okay, so that was the film. I do want to add, just because Pesach is coming up, and it's not in the video, and it's not even in the book about him, but because we're in touch, this was a Yad Vashem, working with him, his son Ephraim used to tell the story that his son Ephraim would be in the old city in Yerushalayim, and over Pesach, he would see Jews that were eating pretzels over Pesach, and it bothered him, and he didn't know what to do. And he went to his Rav, the religious family. He went to the Rav, and the Rav said, "You know what? Start carrying matzah around, and you can, offer it to people, and then maybe they'll eat that instead of the pretzels." And that's what he started doing, Ephraim, and people did start taking the matzah. But he told the director of pedagogy at Yad Vashem, he said, what was interesting is that when one of the days when he was carrying the matzah, there was a smell that matzah has. I mean, it's not like like potato cocoa, but it has a smell, and all of a sudden he had memories of his father, because he was carrying the matzah, of his father telling him about getting matzah in the Warsaw ghetto when they couldn't get any other food, the lengths that they went to get matzah when Pesach came. And he said, maybe it was a full circle. He worked so hard to get the matzah there. And maybe that's why he felt he was inspired to give out matzah to Jews that would not be eating matzah otherwise. So anyways, I just wanted to share that with you because this Pesach was coming. So I just want to finish up with what we did and a little bit tear apart this video, and I hope maybe you already, a little bit understand our educational philosophy, and you could see what we were doing with the video. But you'll see that, first of all, there were images, right? We bring real pictures before the war now. It's very interesting because in Yad Vashem, I mean, all the pictures, almost all of them are black and white. And in Yad Vashem, speaking of things going on today, there's a big picture from Babi Yar, of items left behind at Babi Yar. And in the museum at Yad Vashem, they restored the color to the photo, meaning it's the only, I think, one of the only pictures from the Holocaust in the museum, and it's a huge wall. And what the idea there is that they want to remind people, because they see all the black and white photos. Oh, the Holocaust happened so long ago, and we are getting further and further away. But they want to remind people that the Holocaust happened in modern times. You shouldn't forget that. With the children, the black and white photos work in our favor, for the younger children especially, because it's saying it happened a long time ago. In other words, this is not what's happening now. We're talking about something that happened a long time ago. So we have the photos, and you'll see we don't have these photos, but you can bring photos. You can show photos of Jewish life in Warsaw before the war. Or anywhere in Poland before the war. There's many photos of children, right? And when they see these photos, this one was from the video. We have another one from the video. This one too, but I brought a few others that, people can find. I mean, we have these in our photo archive. They can be found. I mean, look at this. We have children. These are all children in Poland. They're ice skating. Here, they're having a snowball fight, okay? And the idea here is that, I mean, I'm sure you're getting the idea, is that when your children see children in those times, they remember that all these children we're talking about, that they become victims in the Holocaust. They didn't start as victims. They were real people just like them, and that they were involved and did things just like they were real children. And so we want to remind them of that. That's part of telling the full human story. We start with Jewish life before the war, what happened during the war, and then we talk about what happened after, like return to life. Okay, so we see that here. Now you'll also notice, right, that he starts and he's talking to his grandson, right, on the couch, a grandfather and a grandson. And, we can ask, why is it important to start with this modern day scene? Why do we insert the historical account within a framework of a current situation? How does the scene here, right, the scene alone, how does that create an emotional anchor? Right? What creates a feeling of empathy within younger students? So it's a safe place for them. A grandson is on his grandfather's couch. He's looking at old pictures. This could be happening to anybody. It's a very safe scene that we set up before we tell them more difficult, before we give over the more difficult information. And again, and then we show the photographs like we said before. Now, the photographs, they're visual proof. It's important that the story is true. And I should mention that it's important also, especially for a first encounter with the Holocaust, that it is a true story. Okay, so and also there's a lot of books out there that, let's say, are about, a cat that went through Kristallnacht or items that went through the Holocaust. I wouldn't not recommend them, but I would maybe recommend more a story that's a true story that happened to a person. Okay, so, and that way, because when your children say that this really happened, you say, this is really the story that happened. Yes, this is what this Simcha told us happened to him. We know this happened to him because it happened to Simcha. This is a true story. That's very important to be able to say with authority. Okay, so we do that, and we bring the pictures in, and you show scenes of children playing games, things that children do nowadays. It very much makes them be able to relate to the children that they're learning about. Okay, and then we move on. First, we have different, you'll see here, layers of representation. We have photographs. We have, first we have the scene modern day. Then we have the old time photographs. Then we move on to animation, right? So why do we have all of these different levels of presentation? And that's because they create the safe space, but also there are parts of the story that we don't have photographs for, but also even if we had them, they maybe would be too difficult to show. So at a certain point, we make a decision to switch to animation, to illustrate the story, because we don't have pictures of the story happening, but also because again, it's a safer way. Children are used to seeing animated videos and animated movies. So again, that's a safe visual for them. And then you'll see here, we talked about emotional anchors. I don't know if you caught any of them while you were watching, but for example, when he sees the wall, and maybe you caught some that I haven't picked up here, but as they're talking about the wall going up, he's standing there with his father. His father is with him. As they're telling him, you can't go outside, it's getting difficult. But like we said, when in the book, they're sitting and eating as a family, even as the food is getting less and less, they sit and they cling to the humanity that they knew before the war, right? One of the ways that when I give a whole lecture on spiritual resistance, I try to explain to people, spiritual resistance isn't just sometimes, having theater in the ghetto, which very much is, that is spiritual resistance, but sometimes it's just holding on to continuity in a world of chaos, right? Just trying to do what it is that you always did when they're always trying to take it away from you. That's a form of resistance in a way. So we have that here. This is an emotional anchor. And here, after he runs away, but he comes back and he's embraced by his mother. Okay. So it's a little bit scary that he runs away, but he's safe and he comes back and he's back in the arms of his mother. And when they talk about, this is something that I picked up on, and I think it's very deliberate. When he says what happens to the parents, and he said they didn't survive. Look at this. He puts his arm on his shoulder. He says, it's okay. That's loss. There is a loss, but he was able to move on, and he jumps right into his life after the war about how he survived, and he got married, and he had children, and he moved to Israel, and so on and so forth. Okay, so again, that's an emotional anchor. He's like, don't worry, you're with me. We're okay. He's okay. We're all okay. Okay. And here, the light in the darkness moments. Okay, so first of all, we saw from the very beginning, it's a story of friendship, right? Here, it's a story. It's a true story that we're telling here. They had no food. And she took this bar of chocolate and she melted it so she could share it with everyone. It's really a tremendous act of sacrifice, really. I mean, younger children may not see it like that, but I hope as adults, we understand that they had no food to share, and look what she's doing. Even with nothing, she was still able to share. So we have sharing, we have hachnasat orchim, we have a story right before our very eyes, are inviting guests, the children, to come over in their home where they have nothing. And here we see moving on with life, and we also see becomes a person, we see that, he goes on and he has a family. Okay. And again, here we have the positive values. I listed all the ones that I came up with, but in this one video, we can pull out when we pay attention and we look at the details. We have sharing, we have caring for others, we have hachnasat orchim, we have responsibility, right? And we can talk about like kids that their childhoods were taken away from them. In a sense, they had to become adults, but he takes on responsibility when I'm sure even they didn't want him to, but he does. Family, friendship, and of course in the after, when he survives, it's not during the Shoah, but we still have it as it's part of his story, because his liberation, his return to life is a part of his Holocaust story. We have Bikur Cholim, we have bringing happiness to others. There are all of these things in this one, what could be dark story. Okay, and so really, we went over all these questions already. I'm just showing you how we did cover them when we tore apart the video. And again, just keep in mind that there has to be processing afterwards. That's very, very important. And that you want to talk about, for example, teachers, parents as well. You want to pick out the values that are important to you, that you want to give over from whatever story you're telling, or for whatever difficult thing that you're talking about. But certainly when teaching the Holocaust. And then we have for teachers activities, classroom activities. So I have the suggestions here. We don't have to go over them, but I do want to share with you that when we talk about activities, we're talking about doing, and I'm coming to the end here, so I just have one more thing to share with you. And, again, as I was thinking about as parents, giving this to parents and as opposed to teachers. So we have the classroom activity that teachers do. But when I was thinking about that, and I know we've all gone through this. Unfortunately, we have friends, we have family, people close to us that experience hardship or experience trauma or something's happening. And I can honestly say the first thing we always think to do is cook, right? If there's a Shiva house, if somebody's sick, if there's, we cook. But the truth is, we sometimes joke about that, but why do we do that? I mean, first of all, it is first and foremost to help the person that needs it. But I think also from our end, nobody feels comfortable. Certainly we haven't been raised to feel comfortable to sit back and watch people going through a rough time. We want to do something. And so I think that as parents and as teachers, as a community, that certainly if it's something difficult that happens, somebody's sick, we can all write cards. Bikur Cholim. If something traumatic happened, I know that there was difficult times in the school. Maybe sometimes you can address the problem, but maybe something as a class can get together and do something positive to offset something bad that happened. If there's even an anti-Semitic incident that happens, right? Maybe somehow forces could join together, but and do something to offset, that the bad thing that troubled the children. So I have here examples of, but I think it's important because then we empower our children, and even if it's not really affecting what's bothering them, they're doing something that's an answer to their anxiety. And I think it's just as human beings, we understand that doing something can be helpful. So I brought here examples just to show you of what happens around Yom HaShoah, because even though we tell stories and we remember, but there are things that people are physically doing. So for example, at Yad Vashem, we have this I remember wall. So we don't just say, I remember. What happens now? We're using social media like everybody else. People go and they go into Facebook, they go into, I don't know, I only know Facebook, but I know there's other things out there like Instagram or things like that, but people go, they get a name, they have somebody that they have to remember. It's an active act of remembering. So it's not just saying, okay, I'll remember. Excuse me. We do the same thing in Israeli schools here. Maybe some schools there. I've heard they also do the same thing. You get a candle, you bring it home. It has a name on it. There's a name, not just a number, a collective number of 6 million. Now, everybody in the community has a name and they remember that person. That's an act of giving. We can tell a story, we can remember that. And I want to bring to you this Operation Dugo. If you don't know what Operation Dugo is, you should definitely find out before next January 18th, I think, next year. But Dugo, I'm forgetting his last name right now, so forgive me, but you can look it up on Facebook. He was a teenage survivor of Auschwitz, and he was sent on the death march, and I believe it was January 18th. And that's when he has this Operation Dugo. And what happened was he was from Hungary, and to survive the death march when it was so difficult and he was starving and freezing, his mother had always promised him, they were Zionists, and she had said that when we go to Israel, she used these hopeful words, we'll eat bekelech. And I think he explains that bekelech were these little rolls that they had in Hungary. Maybe some of you are Hungarian and you know what they are. And he tells a story that he did manage to survive, and he managed to get to Israel. And he went, one of the first days he was in Israel, he went to Machane Yehuda. And he goes to Machane Yehuda, and what does he see? He sees a falafel stand. And he looks at the falafel and he says, these are the bichalech that I had in mind that kept me alive on the death march that my mom told me about. Yes. Leitner, thank you. Dugo Leitner, yes, Marlene, thank you for his last name. And he sat down and he ate falafel, and he made a tradition. He would go every year on January 18th to celebrate his survival of Auschwitz and survival of death marches, survival of the Shoah. He would go and he would eat falafel, and he started doing it with his kids, and he started doing it with his friends. And then eventually it is now, you can see, I hope you can see it all over the world. People on January 18th, they eat falafel and they send a picture that says Am Yisrael Chai. That's what he likes to see. And it's really a beautiful act. And it's really just people eating, but it brings Holocaust awareness. It brings him joy to see people just celebrating life and celebrating his life and celebrating being alive and celebrating Israel. So see, it's a way to offset something bad that happened with something like bringing happiness, something as simple as bringing happiness to the world and cohesiveness and togetherness. So this is how we will end the discussion today, because I think I kept you a little bit longer. If there were any questions, or discussions, comments that people wanted to share, I'd be happy to. You can take yourselves off of mute if you want to ask me a question directly. Let's see. Yes, they do sell what was the Holocaust book as well. I don't know what age you would be reading it for, but we try not to teach the Holocaust topically, meaning by topic, until 6th grade, which is the recommended age that children begin to understand historical concepts. So we have an online teaching unit that I've been working during COVID. Things are going online, things are more technology. So there's an online unit that takes the children. It's called Through Our Eyes, and eyes a play on words because it's through our eyes. It's children that experienced the Holocaust. So it's all diaries or memoirs from children that went through the Holocaust, but through our eyes. Like, I did this, I did that. So it's a little bit of a play on words there. It's online teaching unit that should be going up on the Yad Vashem website very shortly. Again, as soon as I get back to Israel and I'm able to finish it. So anyway,
Lori,
we have that. Yeah.
Lori, go ahead. I wanted to ask.
I just had a question.
Okay.
You go first.
Wait,
okay,
I'm going to stop my share first of all, so I can maybe see.
Okay. What age do you recommend that video for?
Okay. So that video is for 3rd and 4th grade. They just made a brand new video for 5th and 6th grade. If I had a chance, we don't have time to show it, but if you would go and watch it now, you can look it up. It's just Google or just search on YouTube, Yad Vashem Barak, B-A-R-A-K. It should come up. It's the story of Aharon Barak, who survived with the help of a righteous among the nations. And you'll see it's supposed to be 8 minutes. It's 11 minutes long. And that's one of the reasons why is because in the beginning, it's expanded information on the history and the treatment of the Jews. And it's also at the end, there's a little more commentary on and he himself is still alive. He became the president of the Supreme Court in Israel. and he gives his comment on what he thinks is important to learn from the Holocaust. And you can see it's geared towards older children. So that's for more 5th and 6th grade, but it follows the same format. It's a grandmother and granddaughter, and they're walking together, and they go to the library and the Supreme Court, and then it's the same kind of format, and then they go to animation. It's also my acting debut because I play the mother in that video. If you happen to watch it, you might recognize my voice, but I have a small part. I have a really small part, but but anyways, so yeah, go and watch it. I'd be curious to see, you know, what you think about it. But yeah, so those are the videos, and we have books. So we're trying to really increase what we have available to students in English. So that's what I'm working on first and foremost at Yad Vashem. Okay, were there any other questions people had or
Lori,
comments?
I just had one. I had a question. Hi. I'm just curious how you balance the piece about making the kids before the war relatable with not making the kids feel like it could happen to me. That to me seems a little tricky.
Right. Okay. So first of all, I mean, you're talking about places that are far away, right? And you're using the black and white and black. I mean, listen, talking about the Holocaust is a lot easier than talking about anti-Semitism today, you know, or talking about what's going on. I mean, listen, you know, I'll give you an example and I forget which mitzvah it was, as they say, because unfortunately there have been quite a few since I've moved to Israel. But I remember calling it the summer that wasn't. It was the summer where the rockets were like reaching where I lived. And my son at that time, I mean, just to give you a reflection of what it could be like to live in Israel sometimes. At one point, you know, and I lived literally like a 4-minute walk from where he was going to camp in school. And one point I said, you know, I mean, he used to walk to school on his own. He was probably 8 or 9 years old, but you know, in Israel, you can come home and cook dinner, you know, like you can run an office when you're 8 or 9 years old. I mean, I'm kidding, but sometimes you wonder, but he would walk to school on his own, and he walked to camp, and I was walking him because why? If a siren came, we had a minute and a half and we had to run somewhere. And it came to a point where he didn't want me to really walk him. And so we had to have a siren plan. And what was the siren plan? That if he had gotten to the corner, he'd run back to school. If he'd gotten across the street and to the other corner, he'd run to his friend's house. If it was past his friend's house, he could run home. Like we had to figure out how much time it would be for him to get to every place, because on the one hand, believe it or not, he wanted to go on with life. Yeah, he let me walk him to school the first couple of days, but you'd be surprised. Kids, again, it sounds counterintuitive, but think of a muscle. The more resilient they learn to be, the more resilient they will be. You know, listen, I grew up in Chicago, and you know, we had to have tornado drills. Why do we have to have tornado drills? Because there could be a tornado. Did I go home and have a nightmare that night that there was a tornado and I was in it? Of course I did. But I had to be prepared to run out if there was a tornado. So it's very difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but you know, we have to unfortunately prepare our children for the world that they live in. And I'm telling you that if you start when they're earlier, they will be able to handle it better when they get older. And here, I'll give you an example. Hold on. I'm going to give you an example of something. I don't know if you can see. I'll do a little trick here with you. Wait, don't go anywhere. For anybody who wants to stay, I think I should have this with me. I don't know if it'll work over Zoom. Okay, I'm holding something up. Do you know what that is? What is this? Can you see? Take a guess. What does it look like to you? What might it be? Somebody guess. I'll tell you what I guess.
A bullet?
Huh? A bullet,
like
okay.
bullet.
I'll go a little closer. Can somebody see? So I looked at it, right? I saw a little glass case that
Those
had
floaty things, right?
well, okay, floaty. What?
A
Yeah, you
lever?
mean-
A lever?
Okay.
A lever.
Why do you
Balance?
say?
It's a
Why do you
level.
say a level? Yes. Why?
Yeah, because I
'Cause
saw
if
the
you-
2 lines on the liquid.
Okay. So what I saw at first, I said a perfume sample because what else had I ever seen that was in glass that had liquid in it? So I said a perfume sample, and my other colleague said, he goes, a thermometer. Now it is a leveler, but the levelers I've ever seen handyman use, because I've never personally used a leveler in my life, was long and it had things in it. So I'd never seen a leveler that looked like this. So that means that what would have happened if I would have gotten this, I would not have used it properly. If I think it's perfume, I'm going to crack it open and try to put it on my wrist. or my cow's going to try and put in his mouth to take his temperature. But the person who knows it's a leveler is going to use it properly. Okay, so it's really the same thing with traumatic topics. I know it sounds crazy, but if they learn about the Holocaust through Tommy, I'm not saying you have to start when they're that little, but if they learn through Tommy, or they learn through, let's say, Simcha, and they know that people survived, but they know that people still had love and friendship and sharing during the Holocaust, then they'll have a place in their brain. It's called a schema. They'll have a drawer in their brain where the Holocaust goes. And the next time they look at the Holocaust, they'll put it there and they'll know what to do with it. So then when they get older and they have to struggle with some of the things that happened in the Holocaust, I know it's a little tricky to understand, but they will be much better off for it when they get older. They'll certainly feel, and they'll feel safer if you tell them what's really going on. So why was I talking about my son? But also that summer, I have to say, my older son was in Hesder Yeshiva, and he was going into the army, and he was a combat soldier. And so my son was actually very afraid. So first of all, I was able to tell him, well, he's going into training. They don't send the soldiers who are training into the wars, and hopefully it'll be over by then. But there's one thing you can't do, and I could not promise him that my son would be okay. You can't do that. So you look for what? You look for safely in, safely out, or moments of light in the darkness. So what did I say to him? Well, first of all, I say, we pray. What can we, and then what can we do? So I said to him, well, the Israeli army is one of the best armies in the world, and they train them as best as they can. So if he has to go into war, he will be they will all be the best trained soldiers they can be. I explained to him why he had to go into war. I said, what can we do? You know what? We can dive into Hashem, that all the soldiers will be okay. And but the one thing you can't do, you can't tell them there won't be any more anti-Semitism. You can't promise them if somebody's diagnosed with cancer that they won't. You can't do that, but you can give them the tools that when bad things happen, that they're able to handle it. And none of us want to do that, but like and you guys, I was talking to Adina before, and we were talking, Adina, remember we mentioned stranger danger, and you said, well, our school, it's not stranger danger today. It's a whole different, but again, if we don't talk to our kids about stranger danger, or nowadays, and I'm not a professional in that either, but again, when we talk to them about that, we have to remind them that we don't want to break their world. We remind them they're good people, and most of the people they know are good people, but we have to teach them the signs, and we also have to teach them, active things they can do, they can turn to, we know they can trust. That's an active thing they can do. They feel empowered when they can act and they know what they can do. So if there's any other questions,
Lori, I'm gonna end. If people have questions, I'll have them get in touch, just because it's very late. But thank you so much. This was so informative, so powerful, gave so many great examples, and we just really want to thank you for bringing this to SAR.
Okay, and if you know what, I'm going to put my email here, because I know somebody was asking.
There's some personal questions, so I think
so I'm going to put my email. I think that is the best. Lori.Gerson. I should have put that in. Yeah, it's easy. Lori.Gerson@yadvashem.org, but I'll just put it in for a minute, and then okay, there it is. So then you can copy it if you need it. Okay. So if anybody wants, there's a personal question. So send me any questions, or if you have any follow-up, if you go home and you process and you have questions tomorrow, just like, you're my students now. So if you have questions after you process, be in touch. And, I'm happy to help when I can. All right. So thank you all for coming. And
thank you, Lori.
My pleasure. Oh, hi.
Nice
there you
to
are.
See you. Sorry about that. I had a
Nice to
little
see
Wi-Fi.
Yeah, no, you explain. Yeah, no, it's all good. All good. Thank you all for coming. All right.
Okay.
Bye, everyone. Good night.
How's the US?
Thank you.
I'm not used to it. I have to readjust to city life. I'm a country bumpkin. I live in Hashoah, it's the burbs out where I am. So yeah, but,
so it's nice
but
to
Marlene's
see you
taking good care of me.
Hello,
so.
Marlene. Hello.
Yeah, she's taking good care of me. Even water, and even names that I forget.